There are overthrows that don't happen in boardrooms, nor do they require fiery revenge. Sometimes it all begins with a seemingly harmless sentence. Pack up your things, your sister needs that room. And just one sentence like that is enough to push the quietest member of a family out of the silence, forcing everyone to re-examine their place in a household they thought they had full control over. In a world where familial love is often traded for favoritism and silence is mistaken for weakness, the story of Clara Davenport is not just a moment of retaliation. It is a journey of reclaiming her rightful place through intellect resilience and the maturity her family had long underestimated. And in the end, the very place that once sought to push her out became the epicenter of a transformation no one ever saw coming. Pack up your things. Your sister needs the space to work. My father Douglas stood in the doorway with that familiar tone of disappointment I had grown used to over the years. He didn't ask how I felt. He simply issued an order. I sat still in front of my laptop, the glow from the bank's confirmation email reflecting off my face, a simple message carrying a truth they didn't yet know. I had just officially become the legal owner of this house. The house they were now trying to evict me from. Zoe needs a proper space to start her business. He continued as if it were a foregone conclusion. You have until Friday. I closed the laptop, keeping my voice calm and steady. I'll start packing tomorrow. He nodded, seemingly satisfied I hadn't protested, and turned away. Maybe he thought I was still the obedient daughter who never made trouble, the one who chose silence to keep the peace. I used to be that person. The one who stayed in this house during college to save money while Zoe was sent off to a prestigious private school in California. The one who quietly paid the electric bill, paid for the roof repairs while my sister chased one failed business venture after another. And now they didn't hesitate to push me out of the room I'd called mine since I was 6, to turn it into a studio for Zoe's latest coaching empire. My sister stepped into the room moments later, her golden hair swaying like she was already filming a lifestyle video. I'm thinking of sage green for the walls, she said, eyes sparkling, not even trying to hide her excitement. It'll be perfect for my positivity content. I looked around the room, the familiar reading nook, the desk where I'd planned my first investments, the quiet dreams no one had ever bothered to ask about. Sage green sounds nice, I replied with a small neutral smile. She had no idea, none of them did, that I'd been tracking the family's financial situation for months, that I had discovered they'd mortgaged the house a 3rd time and couldn't afford the payments, that I had prepared meticulously to attend the foreclosure auction and won. Zoe glanced at me, frowning slightly. I know you might be sad, but you could find a place out there, right? You're good with budgeting. I nearly laughed. Good with budgeting was their way of saying I'd built a portfolio of 12 income-generating properties, while Zoe burned through our parents' money without a second thought. I simply replied, I'll manage. And I would. They just didn't know that this time my way of managing was flipping the entire board. The next morning, as the first light of day slipped through the bedroom curtains, the room that was still legally mine, though now enthusiastically occupied, I sat quietly with my coffee, looking out at the backyard, where Zoe was setting up props to film her launch into personal energy healing video. 3 ring lights, a vision board plastered with cutouts, and a few worn yoga mats from previous projects were all piled on the dew-covered grass. She turned to adjust the camera angle, beaming at the screen as if addressing a world of devoted followers. I'd seen that smile before, when she opened the organic smoothie shop, when she launched her yoga studio, and when she live-streamed from a rented apartment selling life-changing products. 3 ventures, 3 failures. Yet never any real consequences, because our parents were always there remortgaging the house, emptying retirement savings so Zoe could have one last chance, again and again. I had witnessed every expenditure, even if no one ever told me. In my father's office, buried among the disorganized stacks of paperwork he assumed I'd never see, I found the foreclosure notice printed in chilling precision, warning that the house would be sold at auction if the debt wasn't paid within 30 days. No one mentioned it. No one asked me, the daughter who had been transferring money every month to help during tough times, if I knew they were standing at the edge of losing everything. And maybe they thought I didn't need to know. Because to them, I was just Clara, the reliable eldest daughter, just an ordinary accountant, not the adventurous type. What they didn't know was that I hadn't been with Morgan and Finch for nearly a year. I had resigned after earning enough investment profit to run my own company, Davenport Realty Holdings, specializing in suburban residential rentals. My current portfolio includes 12 properties, from compact apartments in Somerville to 3-bedroom houses in Westford. All are operating smoothly with steady cash flow, clear contracts, none dependent on faith and love, the way my family seemed to operate. I never bragged. I never spoke of it. Because for years I'd accepted my role, the older sister who stepped back, deferred, held the fort so her younger sister could shine. But this time, I would not retreat again. I watched as Zoe waved to the camera, proclaiming a new slogan about inner transformation, and wondered how many people would once again get swept up in promises that would never be fulfilled. But this time, I would no longer be the silent spectator. I was the one holding the deed. I was the one setting the new terms. And by the end of this week, the entire household would know that I was no longer the forgettable Clara they had always assumed me to be. That night's dinner was lasagna, my favorite dish, or at least it used to be, made by my mother, perhaps, as some half-hearted attempt to soften the blow of Dad's cold command for me to move out, and Zoe's overly bright smile. The smell of baked cheese still held the nostalgia of childhood, but the taste had dulled considerably, or maybe it was just me who had changed. I sat at the dinner table across from my parents, quietly pushing aside the layers of pasta on my plate, while Zoe chattered nonstop about her upcoming video content, her target audience, her plans to raise the frequency of life energy as though she were the CEO of a global corporation, rather than someone who had just failed 3 different business ventures in a row. Mom nodded along occasionally, chiming in with, "I believe this time you'll succeed." Dad sat upright, his face stern, like he was in the middle of a board meeting. I put down my fork and, with all the calm I could summon, said, "What about my support? The money I gave you both last year to pay down the mortgage, or the roof repairs I paid for out of my own pocket?" Mom paused, the napkin in her hand tightening, but she didn't meet my eyes. Dad furrowed his brows and lowered his voice as if issuing a decree. "This isn't about money. You need to see the bigger picture. Zoe has vision, creativity. She just lacks the right conditions." I let out a quiet laugh. "Vision like the organic smoothie shop I asked," locking eyes with him. "Or the yoga studio with 3 clients and a $20,000 deficit?" The air froze for a second. Dad set his fork down, the sharp clink against the porcelain slicing through the silence. "That's enough," he said sternly. "If you can't support your sister, maybe it really is time for you to leave this house. Clara, you don't understand anything about business. All you ever do is that boring accounting job hiding in your room." I stood up, gathered the dishes, and walked to the sink, not even bothering to respond. What was there left to argue? They'd played their roles in this script for too long. Zoe was the special one, and I, the perpetual supporting character, was the quiet, dependable one. But then I smiled to myself. They didn't need to know that for the past 2 years I'd been buying, renovating, and managing 12 rental properties across the city. They didn't need to know I'd left that boring accounting job 6 months ago to run my own company. They certainly didn't need to know that in just 3 days I'd be returning not as their daughter, but as the legal owner of the house. I let the hot water rinse the grease off the dish, feeling lighter than I had in years. They would soon find out what real business looked like. And I, the one they always thought was just good with spreadsheets, would be the one setting the rules. On Friday, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky was still a pale gray of an overcast early autumn day, and the chill seeped through every window frame, thickening the air with a quiet weight. I chose a simple, well-fitted navy suit, one my family had never seen, because I kept it at the office. My hair was neatly pinned up, and I clasped on my grandmother's pearl necklace, the only person who had ever truly believed I was capable of something great. Today, I wasn't Clara, the obedient daughter, or the quiet sister. Today, I was Clara Davenport, the legal owner of the house they were living in, the entrepreneur, leading a profitable real estate company across the region. I left the house as usual, letting them believe I was heading to the accounting firm. But in truth, I was going to the law office of Charlotte Wynne, where we finalized the last documents and prepared for a family meeting unlike any that had come before. "You sure you want to face them alone?" Charlotte asked for the third time that morning. "I've seen a lot of cases, parental favoritism, kids carrying financial burdens, but rarely anyone who's flipped the script as smartly and steadily as you." I looked her straight in the eye, resolute. I need to be there. They need to understand this isn't revenge. This is consequence. We agreed to meet at 6 p.m., exactly when my father Douglas got home every day. I wanted him present. I wanted everyone present. Because what was about to happen wasn't just a shock, it was a reckoning. When I walked into the house, the scene before me was almost comically ironic. Zoe was directing two bulky guys to move my bed into the garage, and one wall had already been painted sage green just as she'd promised. "Oh, hey, you're back," she said, not even looking up. "Thought I'd just get started." The guys from my gym volunteered to help. I interrupted gently but firmly. "Stop. Everything stops right now." The room fell still. All three froze. Zoe blinked. "What's going on?" My mother came up from the kitchen, her face tense with concern. "Clara." I took a deep breath. "We should wait for Dad. Charlotte will be here any minute, and everyone needs to be present." "Charlotte, who?" Zoe frowned. Right then the doorbell rang. I opened it. Charlotte Wynne stood there in her pale gray suit, folder in hand, calm as if stepping into a contract negotiation rather than a family home on the brink of its greatest upheaval. "Good evening, Mrs. Davenport," Charlotte said. "I'm Clara's attorney. We have a few documents for the family to review." My mother's face turned pale. "Attorney." I turned to them, my voice steady now. "That's right. And as I said, it's best if we wait for Dad." I sat on the sofa, hand resting lightly on the papers signed that very morning, the ones that would completely shift the power dynamic in this house. And I waited, not as the child who had once been sidelined, but as the woman about to reclaim her voice after a lifetime of silence. 10 minutes later, my father walked in his suit, slightly wrinkled tie, loosened eyes confused, as he took in the unusual scene in the living room. Charlotte stood politely. "Mr. Davenport, pleasure to meet you. I'm Clara's legal representative. We need to discuss some documents related to the ownership of this property." He turned to my mother, then looked at me, narrowing his eyes as if I were playing a prank. "What is going on here?" I stood up, pulling an envelope from the folder. "3 weeks ago, I found a foreclosure notice in the drawer of your desk. This house had been remortgaged multiple times, and when repayment was no longer possible, it was listed for public auction. This morning, the transaction was finalized. I'm the one who bought it." The room fell still. Zoe froze in place, eyes wide. My mother dropped her napkin. My father's face turned pale, lips tightening to a stark white. "That's impossible," he stammered. "You're an accountant." "How could you?" "I haven't been an accountant for almost a year," I cut in. "I left my job to run my own real estate company. I currently own 12 rental properties across Maple Heights and neighboring areas. This house is number 13. All the paperwork is legal." Zoe stepped back, voice sharp and disbelieving. "You're joking, right? This is our home." Charlotte opened the file and pulled out the new title deed. This is the legal document confirming Clara as the rightful owner of 72 Birchwood Lane. I've also prepared a tenancy agreement if you wish to continue residing here. My mother began to cry. My father still said nothing, slumped on the couch as if the weight of the world had just landed on his shoulders. Zoe shook her head repeatedly, her voice trembling. No, you can't do this. I'm building a career. You know how many ventures I've already started. I know, I replied, not bitterly, just firmly. And I also know how many times Mom and Dad emptied their accounts, took out high-interest loans, and remortgaged this house to fund projects you never finished. Meanwhile, every dollar I contributed, from fixing the roof to bailing out the property taxes, was quietly ignored. No thank you, no acknowledgement. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. All this time, we thought you were just the dutiful daughter living quietly, and you've built an entire business empire. I didn't laugh. I didn't retaliate. I just said softly, maybe it's time everyone realized that success doesn't need to be loud or flashy. Sometimes quiet persistence is the clearest answer of all. Charlotte continued to explain the terms of the lease agreement. I looked around the room where I used to see only pity in their eyes, and for the first time I felt seen. Not because I had won, but because I had stood tall amid long-standing biases and declared I will be silent no longer. And now, if they want to stay, they'll have to learn to live with that truth. The weekend after that seismic confrontation, the atmosphere in the house felt like the surface of a lake just hit by a rock still on top, but the ripples beneath hadn't yet subsided. I left that very night, not to avoid them but to give them space to feel the aftershocks of the truth. Charlotte advised me not to return until they officially signed the lease, and I agreed. I stayed at a small hotel near the town center, spending my Sunday morning sipping coffee with Charlotte in the delicate sunlight of a quiet day. Your father still hasn't said anything? Charlotte asked, her gaze both sharp and deeply understanding. No, I replied, shaking my head. He's been hiding in his office, like staying inside will keep the truth out. Charlotte nodded, took a sip of tea, and set her cup down. You've turned the tables, Clara. They no longer have the power to ignore your worth. Don't let them use guilt to drag you back into your old role. I glanced at my phone, one new message from Mom. Come home so we can talk. Everyone's waiting. When I returned, my mother stood at the door, her face a mix of hesitation and hope. My father sat in the living room, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights, and Zoe curled up in the armchair like a child sent to the corner. I stepped into the thick air as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. We talked. My mother began, her voice faint. And we think the lease terms are fair. I nodded. That's what I was hoping for. My father pulled out a stack of printed pages, the lease agreement fully signed, his handwriting slightly shaky but resolute. We didn't have much of a choice. He said, the apology stuck in his throat, not yet formed. There's always a choice, I replied. You had a choice when you used this house to fund Zoe's ventures. You all chose to overlook what I was doing, and now I'm choosing to establish boundaries. Zoe looked at me, eyes red and swollen. You knew what I was planning for that room. I painted the walls, cleaned everything, scheduled the shoots. I really believed I could do it this time. I looked at her, not angry, not mocking. If you truly want to build something, you'll find a way, but not by taking someone else's room and spending money that isn't yours. She dropped her gaze and stayed silent. I spoke slowly. If you sign the lease, you keep the current room. I'll move back into my old one on Monday, and any changes made, including the new paint, will need to be restored according to the agreement. My mother stepped forward, tears slipping down her cheeks. Clara, we're still family. Right. I didn't retreat, but I wasn't harsh either. Family, if it's real, starts with respect. And respect begins with not treating someone's sacrifice as a given. They said nothing, but they didn't need to. Because for the first time I saw it, recognition. They were beginning to understand that I was no longer just the good daughter I was, now the one holding the flag of fairness in a place that once dismissed it. And if they truly wanted to call me family, they would have to learn to treat me as an equal, not the one in the background they only remembered when they needed something. Madeline Rhodes sat silently in her car outside the house she had once grown up in her eyes, fixed on the second-floor window where now hung a green curtain Serena had chosen for her office. For the past 3 days, she had been staying in a small hotel near the town center, giving the family time to face the reality. The house they once considered theirs now legally belonged to Madeline, the daughter once deemed too ordinary, with no dreams, no voice. Serena had avoided her since the confrontation, and her parents remained engulfed in guilt and confusion. They still hadn't signed the lease, but today was the deadline, and Madeline hadn't come to plead. Wearing a charcoal gray suit, her hair neatly tied back, she stepped into the house like a stranger returning to collect rent. Helen, her mother, was bustling around in the kitchen, looked up when she saw her daughter and sighed. "Your father is in the study," she said, as if nothing between them was unusual. Madeline nodded slightly and walked straight upstairs. She knocked on her door, and Serena opened it with an expression that was both startled and disappointed. "You really came to kick us out?" Serena asked, her voice catching. Madeline didn't answer right away. She placed a stack of documents on the desk. "I came to remind you that the lease needs to be signed today. If not, I'll be forced to act according to my responsibility as the legal owner." Silence draped the room. Serena lowered her gaze but said nothing. Downstairs, Walter, her father, was waiting. He held the documents in his hands, flipping through the pages with trembling fingers. "The terms are very fair," he admitted, "even lower than market rate." Madeline simply nodded. Helen interjected, her eyes red and puffy. "We're family, Madeline. We can't just sign papers like strangers." Madeline looked at her mother, her gaze calm but not cold. "You were the first to treat me like a stranger. I've just learned to do the same." The silence that followed was heavy. Serena slowly came down the stairs holding a pen. "I'll sign," she said, her voice small but firm. "But I want to keep my room." Madeline nodded. "As long as you follow the terms, you can keep it. But any modifications to the interior, including the wall color, must be restored to original condition." Helen looked at her daughter as if seeing someone she'd never truly known. "You've changed so much," she said almost sorrowfully. "No," Madeline replied. "I've just stopped letting myself be underestimated." That evening, the three of them sat at the dinner table without an invitation from Madeline. They were tenants now, no longer homeowners. And for Madeline, the silence was no longer submission, it was a boundary. She wasn't doing this out of revenge. She was doing it to be seen. So that for the first time in her life, those who had once looked down on her would have to lift their heads and recognize her true worth, not with empty compliments, but with the act of signing their names. On Monday morning, I returned to my room, the private space that had once been coldly taken from me, carrying boxes of books, a small vase of flowers, and a folder of new client files. As I stepped through the doorway, the sage green paint Zoe had once excitedly boasted about had now been covered with ivory white, just as stipulated in the lease agreement. I said nothing, simply drew back the curtains to let sunlight flood into the room I had once left behind in silence. This time, I didn't need anyone's permission to stay. I was here because I had the right to be, not because of blood ties, but because of the law, the deed, and the independence I had earned in exchange for the indifference of those who once called themselves family. Zoe no longer live streams every morning like before. Instead, she spends hours in her room reading the documents I left behind, basic spreadsheets, profit models, sample business plans, the kind of material she once dismissed as boring as a timesheet. That afternoon, while I was reviewing a rental contract with a property client, Zoe knocked on the door, lingering at the threshold like a child, unsure if she was allowed to enter. "Could you show me how to build a cash flow statement?" she asked. I looked at her, slightly surprised, but didn't show it. I closed my laptop and invited her in. For the first time, I saw Zoe set her phone aside and open a notebook. No talk of energy frequencies, no mentions of awakening the feminine, just numbers, logic, and questions that genuinely needed answers. In the days that followed, Zoe came to sit with me every morning. She began to understand the difference between an idea and a plan, between passion and feasibility. My parents, who used to avoid anything related to finance, started joining us. Evenings in the kitchen, once a battleground of tension, became mini sessions on household budgeting. My mother learned how to track cash flow, and my father, who used to mock my profession, now patiently read through every line of the refinancing cost sheet. No one spoke anymore about sisters should support each other as a veiled excuse to shift the burden onto me. Because now I was the one teaching, not the one carrying everything. 3 weeks later, Zoe presented me with her first business plan, a service to help small businesses build an online presence. It wasn't flashy or vague. It was a well-founded idea backed by market research costs and a detailed rollout strategy. "I want to rent my own office," she said, her eyes bright. "Just a small space, nothing fancy but mine." I smiled. "I have a vacant property on Elm Street," I replied. "If you're truly serious, I'll lease it to you. But it'll be a real contract, real rent, real terms." Zoe nodded without hesitation, and in that look, I saw for the first time my sister truly grow up. Not because she was given an opportunity, but because she had chosen to reach out and claim it herself. 6 months after, I officially became the legal owner of the house that had once been the center of every struggle. I stood before the glass window of a small office building on Elm Street, where the sign "Willow Digital Solutions" had just been mounted that morning. Zoe was rearranging her desk, adjusting the screen height and carefully wiping down each photo frame. No longer the girl with bouncy curls and vibrant outfits, as if she'd stepped out of a lifestyle Instagram feed today. She wore a crisp white blouse, gray slacks, and had her hair neatly tied back like a true professional. "What do you think?" Zoe turned to ask, her eyes glowing with quiet confidence. "Very professional," I replied, unable to hide my satisfaction. She told me that 3 local small businesses had signed service contracts for the first month. None were friends or family. Real clients sourced from the market, earned through the capabilities Zoe had built herself. When our parents found out, they invited the whole family to dinner. Gone were the tense silences of those early year meals, gone were the veiled remarks about my coldness or cruelty. Instead, Mom shared stories about the basic accounting class she had just completed, and Dad spoke about writing his final paper for a financial management course at the community college. When I brought up the idea of offering a rent-to-own contract for the house to my parents, Mom was silent for a moment before she began to cry, not out of regret or pressure, but gratitude. "I believe you've changed," I said, "and I want all of you to have a real chance to call this place home again, but this time through responsibility." Zoe looked at me and gently asked, "What about me? Do you think I could buy my own house one day?" I nodded. "If you keep working as seriously as you are now, it's entirely within reach." That evening at dinner, Dad shared that his professor had used my real estate portfolio management strategy as a case study in personal financial growth. He didn't know whose parent I was, Dad said, then paused for a long moment. He just said it was a brilliant strategy, efficient, sustainable, and worth learning from. I didn't say anything, just smiled and poured more tea. It wasn't a moment of triumph, but one of healing, a belated nod from a father who once believed only Zoe understood what investment meant. On the way home, Zoe walked beside me, clutching a newly printed marketing plan. "Thank you," she said quietly, "not just for the office space, but for teaching me how to build something real." I didn't respond right away. I just looked up at the city sky turning to dusk and thought, perhaps the most important thing I've ever built wasn't a portfolio, but the capacity for my family to relearn how to see each other with respect. Not out of obligation, but because we had finally overcome the oldest obstacle of all: mutual disregard. And for the first time, I knew for certain this house was no longer just a shelter from rain or sun, but a true place to begin again. As the last light dimmed in that house, no one was the same. The one once considered invisible had become the one who set the rules. Those once unconditionally favored had been forced to learn accountability for their own dreams. And family, the concept we once thought existed only in shared meals and calls for sacrifice, was finally redefined by respect boundaries and genuine gratitude. Not all transformation comes from anger. Sometimes it begins with someone quiet enough to observe, patient enough to wait, and strong enough to rise. If you've ever been dismissed, ever left out of your own story, remember you don't need to rebel. You just need to stand firm. This story doesn't belong to Clara alone, it could belong to any one of us. If this story touched something in you, don't forget to follow the channel, share the video, and leave a comment below. We're always ready to hear your story because sometimes courage begins with simply being understood.